Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched, where this week I watched Sinners from 2025. Now, this is a very complicated movie to unpack, I think, and I'm going to start right at the beginning and saying I think this is a really good movie that I'm going to have to watch multiple times to get the full gist of, because it's something that even as I was watching it, I was feeling like I was, missing certain elements. There's a lot of subtext to unpack. There's a lot of historical aspects to it to unpack. There's a lot going on in this film. And I really enjoyed it. So there it is right off the bat. This movie got a lot of press as it was coming out. I remember it's one of the few movies in recent memory where there was so much advertising that some of it slipped in to me. And there was also a lot of talk outside, sort of in the news media in general, about things about this film. One, because it performed very well. Also because people said some ignorant things about it. No surprise there. And also because, interestingly enough, Ryan Coogler, the director, and I believe is he writer, director, and producer? I believe so. He as part of his negotiations with the studios, insisted on having, among other things, the rights to the movie returned to him after 25 years, which is basically unheard of in Hollywood, and a lot was made of that. Frankly, I think that should be the norm, but that's not how media usually works. Media loves to buy art from artists and keep it forever, keep the rights to it so that, the limit to how much you own your own work is limited. And while that's its own discussion, I think it's particularly pertinent when it comes to some of the subtext of this movie that we will get to in a bit. This will at some point get into spoilers, and I will flag that when we get there. This is a really interesting and unique piece. As I've talked about previously, just from right off the bat, this is a very black movie. Like, frankly, there's just no other way to describe it. It is written, directed, and produced by a black man, primarily black cast, and a lot of the content of the movie is about a very black experience in America in a certain period where, not that it's, great now, but where black people were particularly badly treated. And that is really an overarching thing when talking about this, both in the text and the subtext that's going on in this film, as well as how this movie is made and owned and all these other things, and how we get into the problems of how, people are alienated from their work, and in particular, resources are very rarely given to people of color. But that's outside the scope of this this video to some extent. It's just hard not to slip into it a little bit as we talk about the actual content of the film itself. This is also probably not even probably, it is very clearly a source of consternation from certain individuals, groups, and viewpoints of people who are not particularly open-minded. And so while I think there's a lot of different ways to interpret this movie and a lot of subtext to unpack, and none of them are individually like the correct answer, there are clearly a couple of wrong answers about how to interpret this movie. Even before seeing it, I saw some very ignorant things said about, even from, serious media outlets, about just clearly not understanding what the what is obviously the core concept of the movie, not reading any subtext into it, or reading the wrong subtext, or thinking it's only about base level, like Jim Crow suppression of black people or something like that. And that is like not even scratching the surface. In fact, it's sometimes just overtly wrong. That is part of the narrative simply because it's a story about black people in the South in the 1930s, and therefore it has to be part of the story because that's the world they live in. But that's not what this movie's really about, to my eye. And that is usually where the people of a certain ilk who want to put this movie down are coming from, a place of not really looking at this film very much. We'll get into what actually the film actually is about in a little bit. I think this movie is really, really well produced and really interesting in its production in a lot of ways. It is a combination of different genres, some of which I'm not even going to mention because I think there are spoilers to talk about, but I actually went into this very carefully, not knowing almost anything about it, and got surprised by a couple of the genres that came up. Now, if you're, seeing ads for it all the time, you probably got spoiled more than I did, thankfully for my case. But there are some interesting twists and turns in this narrative, and I think on the surface level, they do sometimes add to not necessarily a pacing problem, but a little bit of what seems like narrative confusion. That is really mitigated because if you're paying attention to the subtext that runs throughout this movie, the subtext is very consistent. And the tone of that subtext is very consistent as well. But if all you're watching for is exactly what's on screen and nothing more, then this probably seems like two weird movies kind of stapled together with an interlude in the middle. And I could see how that could be off-putting to some people. I do think it could be done slightly more cleanly, but I don't think it's a major problem. The actual production of the film is generally quite good. I did have a few problems with some of the lighting and cinematography, especially in particularly dark scenes. This could just be, well, no. It might be in part the watching at home experience that, not in a pitch dark room with a 30-foot screen in front of me. But there are some scenes that are just simply too dark. They're not lit well enough. There's not enough contrast in the scene. And I think that's a shame, especially when, to a certain extent, this movie leans into sort of the fantastical and the magical realism type of thing, that there are so many other scenes in this film that are really, really beautifully shot, really beautifully well lit with very naturalistic lighting, that some of the scenes that were harder to make out seemed like a missed opportunity to use that extra lighting as even a thematic thing. But that's sort of nitpicking more than anything. Generally speaking, the cinematography is very well done. There are a couple scenes in particular that has some pretty extraordinary shots in them. Some of them are done probably through multiple shots and are just really well edited. And in general, there is a lot of, I almost forgot about this actually. This movie in general is very often a masterclass in compositing, in digital compositing. There are a few scenes where I see problems with it. In particular, the train station scene. There are some shots in the train station scene where it looks a little rough to me. Probably wouldn't bother most people, but it looks very, very composited to me. But I almost forgot, the thing I almost forgot is that Michael B. Jordan plays two characters at the same time in this movie, which is let's admit, it's a little bit of a gimmick, but it is done very, very well. It is done so well that by the end of the film, and now when I'm recording it, I kind of forgot that there was one guy playing two guys. They didn't really need to do that. They could have totally just had two different guys. They are twins, but twins don't always look exactly alike. And this is actually not even the first movie we've watched on this show where they've done that. But compared to Legend, which is a much not a great film, it is done very, very well here. I will say in both cases of both movies, the respective actors do a very good job of differentiating between who's playing who. I will say to a certain extent, Legend does this slightly better because it is always extraordinarily obvious who you're looking at, like which character. In this, there are a couple of scenes where, especially when there's a few minor lighting issues, and when their respective red and blue clothes are not as visible or not present, that it is a little bit hard to tell who's who on a couple of occasions, but it's fairly minor. Michael B. Jordan does a really good job throughout this film of portraying two different characters. They're not wildly different, which Legend, they are wildly different characters. They are very similar, and I think that actually leads to my appreciation even more, because the finesse to play two characters who are supposed to be, borderline attached to the hip, that they're so much like each other, but that there's just enough acting to constantly remind you these are two different people. They have two different attitudes. They approach situations in different ways, and they look after each other in ways that they sort of play off each other's strengths and weaknesses. So generally, from that acting standpoint, very, very good. We'll get back to the actors in a second. The digital compositing for the two of them is always very, very well done. They really flex it right at the beginning, one of the very first scenes where the two of them are passing a cigarette back and forth. And if you know a little bit about movie making, like it's still very well done, but it's not crazy impressive. It's not like, completely impossible, amazing editing work. It's just something that you have to be very deliberate about to not make it look bad. And they are very deliberate about it, and it doesn't look bad. They use a lot of very smart shots, something I kind of stopped paying attention as much to later in the film because I no longer had to. But at the beginning, I was like, me with my analytical cinematic eye going, okay, what are they doing in each of these shots where the characters are interacting? What did they do? What's the trick they're using in this shot to ensure, what are they using? A stand-in, a body double? Are they using like a face composite over a different person? All these other things. And eventually I stopped doing that just because it wasn't, it was more of an exercise in, it was distracting basically. But it was kind of fun just to see all the things they did there to make it work. Back to the cinematography. There are a couple of really nicely shot scenes. I don't think there are any shots that I dislike too much. There's a few where there's just some odd angles sometimes that are not my favorite thing, but I can get what the feeling that they were going for. And in general, I guess from I was sort of hoping that this would have a little bit more of an auteur feel to it, I guess. Based on Coogler's background, I've only seen like one other of his films, and he doesn't have a huge number of films under his belt. He's a fairly young guy. So I don't know his I don't have a great knowledge of his all of his prior films, but I would like to see him develop a distinctive visual style a little bit more that I felt like was slightly absent for something that in so many other ways is extraordinarily deliberate. And there were just times I was like, I could see you doing something really clever with the framing here, and you went for something that was a little bit less aggressive. I can get why. Again, this movie did really well. It is, to a certain extent, as it is always, tuned for a broad audience. And if you do really, specific types of cinematography for people who appreciate cinematography on its own, you start to alienate people and make movies look weird in a way that a general audience doesn't care for as much. So I try to be reasonable about that. I just love seeing aggressive cinematography from people with vision. The like all of the sets and costumes and props and all that, I think, are really well done. This is a fairly limited movie in its scope. It's got a pretty decently sized budget, I think about $100 million. And obviously a lot of that would have to go to the editing after all the production. But they keep it fairly tight in terms of the number of locations. They do have a lot of people. This is quite the ensemble cast, but like it's really limited in how much they have to do, but they do all the right stuff with it. All the costumes are fantastic. The what's the word I'm for? The makeup and special or like practical effects is done really very well. I really personally just enjoy the vehicles that are being used in various things. Sometimes they can be hit and miss with period pieces, but I think they do a really nice job here. It adds to the authenticity of the era type of thing. And especially there's always things to be read out of stuff like that as well. Like the fact that two black men in Mississippi are driving a really nice, a really nice car, which immediately starts telling you things about their characters, their background, what they've been through, what their intentions are, those sorts of things. It's like there's so much that's told with often with vehicles, but with props in general. It's just, it was one of the first things I keyed in on was like, okay, they're really well dressed. The car is really nice. What's going on here? So it's, there's a lot to unpack there. So having all those things right is really, really well done. What else on the rest of the production? Like, yeah, I mean, other than I really have very little to nitpick there, other than a few scenes with their lighting. But yeah, there's some digital effects that are done that I think are done really well. They're not overdone. They are done just enough. In fact, they could have done more, and it wouldn't have been a problem. But they are very understated in all the right ways. Which adds to sort of an air of believability and something that has some element of extraordinary supernatural type of thing going on. But I'll sort of I'll leave that talk for a little bit. I already sort of talked about the tone, but it's an interesting mix of a lot of different things. This has some thriller, some horror, some really, like, more than anything, what this movie is earnestly emotional. That doesn't, necessarily track directly to a particular genre, but I think it's particularly notable in all of the genres that it sort of touches on, because I think that's kind of rare. Earnest emotion of really any kind is often very absent in a lot of movies, even fairly good movies. And so both in the the narrative that's woven and the performances of the actors, having a willingness to take time and deliberateness to show a lot of very intense emotion among a lot of the characters, not just, the leads, is a pretty extraordinary factor. There are some moments of great intensity and great intimacy in this film that would not hit nearly as well, or possibly at all, if not for how unusual an amount of time and amount of effort they're willing to put into those things. It's a very emotional film all around, and I think it's pretty extraordinary in that way. It might be one of the most extraordinary things about it. Production wise, what else? We get to the actors. The actors are across the board very, very solid. Really no notes on that. This has, like I said, quite the ensemble cast. A lot of actors I've seen before, usually not in, the biggest roles. I think basically, other than Michael B. Jordan and Haley Steinfeld, there's a lot of other people I've seen in a lot of things, but not in really big roles. But a lot of recognizable faces. Everybody's performances are really quite extraordinary. Again, when you're making a production that is so emotionally charged, that is often where a lot of mediocre to middling actors tend to falter, where their performance of emotion tends to fall apart. Either they overact or underact, or just in some way or another not believable. And I think this movie really runs the gamut and asks a lot of different characters to show a lot of varied and complex emotions through both, not just their line reads, but their physicality and all these other things as well. I'm like running through scenes in my head right now there's some really great scenes in here that I didn't want to pause in the middle of my first watch and go back, but there's scenes in here I could really watch over and over again just to appreciate how well they are performed. Just across the board, really, really well done on the acting and the casting in general. No notes at all. Everybody's fantastic. Serves as a great accent to the story, no matter how small their character, how limited their character time is. I don't want to say small, because even the characters with very limited screen time can have some pretty immense impacts on the emotional and the story parts of the film. Just really very impressive. This movie also has a lot of audio across this movie is generally really, really well done. That is a whole video unto itself, probably, both in terms of talking about the audio production is really well done. The soundtrack is has multiple layers to it, because we're talking about both diegetic and non-diegetic music in significant amounts, and also the blending of genres and eras of music, and it's really interesting to have a movie that has both music that is very set in a time and place and music that is very set out of time, that is, modern composition. So there's a whole discussion to be had about that. Music also factors very significantly directly into the plot. It is possibly the main plot of the film. And so that cannot be understated, the importance of the music, and it's very well done, and it would have had to be for it to be so important in a film like this. So really well done there. Anything else about the I think that mostly covers the things I want to cover before I get into what's going to start to be spoilers. So I think because of how much there is to talk about this, I'm not going to talk about individual plot beats too much, but the remainder of this film, or the remainder of this video rather, is probably going to be fairly spoiler heavy, at least in some ways. So, if you haven't, please go watch this. Obviously, if it's not obvious by now, I really enjoyed it. I think it's pretty extraordinary, and you should definitely see it. Okay, so let's talk about genre. I didn't know this was a vampire film or a horror film. I really, from the very limited ads I saw for it, and from like the poster and stuff, I really thought this was basically like a mob film. The way the Michael B. Jordan's characters Smoke and Stack carry themselves from the very start, and in the like promo material, it looks like it's the kind of it's got that air to it. It's got a lot of this is set in a time and place where, frankly, if you were a black person in the 1930s in the South, you didn't have money. It was just basically impossible, because if you ever did, it would be taken from you, as well as probably your life. So that sets immediately like a lot of gears spinning in terms of thinking about the narrative, just going into it with that. I didn't know any of the plot beats or the supernatural aspects, and that's really where I can see this starting to be alienating for certain people. I have to also imagine that the promo material probably immediately spoiled the fact that it's a vampire thing, despite the fact that only comes in, I guess the first sign of it is like a third of the way in, maybe a little longer. But for the first segment of the movie, that's really never brought up at all. And if you only think of vampires as generic monster that will attack people, then I could see how you could immediately get a wrong idea about what this movie is about, or what its lesson is. If you were, not that well informed, or not that culturally literate. But this is not what it would. I think if you told somebody there's a movie about black people in the South in the 30s and it's got vampires, the assumption would be that vampires are a metaphor for white people and the Klan and all that. And really, that is very much not the case. It is in a way, but not really. The Klan and the racism is really sort of a secondary, almost footnote in this film, because and this took me a little while to unpack, trying to figure out what exactly the metaphor was that was being used for what the metaphor was that the vampires were representing. This particularly threw me because they characterize the lead vampire, I don't even know if he has a name, as they characterize him very clearly as being Irish, which is kind of interesting if you get into a particular history. If you get into American history and Irish history and Black history, and the understanding of the Irish experience in America as well. Irish people were discriminated against for a very long time, including through the 1930s. So having him portrayed as Irish sort of gets the idea that, the Klan didn't like Irish people and occasionally attacked them as well. So generally speaking, the Klan and Irish people didn't get along. So that immediately set off like, okay, from the very beginning, this isn't a ham-fisted thing about vampires being racism. Do I want to talk about where I ultimately landed on it, or do I want to talk about, let's talk about some of the other plot points. It is hard to separate out individual threads in this film because there are so many, not in terms of the complexity of the narrative, but in terms of the things that it's talking about. This movie has discussion about religion, both like Christian and otherwise. It has discussion about sort of money and crime, because there is, I was technically correct. It is a movie about crime and about the mob. But that itself is also sort of a footnote. This idea of where Smoke and Stack got their money and what will eventually happen to them as a result of how they got that money. There's also talking about basically ownership of property and of business. This has a lot of sort of positive narrative about the idea of non-white people, especially in negative situations, still striving to have ownership over their homes, their businesses, that sort of thing. They have I thought it was a particularly interesting note that they had a Chinese family that had multiple established businesses actually in the town where they are at the beginning, and that is a totally historically normal thing. There were there are Chinese immigrants who settled in the South and in Mississippi all the way back in the like late 1800s, early 1900s, and so but they were also treated as second class citizens, as people of color as well. So that was there was a whole subtext there about that sort of like positivity of ownership, but also the things that come with that. I think it was, again, this is a whole plot point that's not even talked about and never comes up again. But I think it was really interesting that the Chinese family has two businesses, one on either side of what is very clearly a racially divided street, where the first one we see is on the black side of town, where I forget which one. I think Stack goes in to talk to his friend, the owner there. And then there's this very deliberate cinematic shot crossing the street and coming back to this other store that's run by the mother in the house, the wife, the woman of the house, and she's running at that time the store on the white side of town, which I believe was theirs as well, but I guess I didn't. There's not necessarily, she may have just been working there, but I think that's notable regardless for sort of this very clear sort of class and race and economic divide. Meanwhile, Smoke and Stack are trying to set up their own juke joint for primarily as an income source. But that becomes very secondary to the main plot of the film. And this, well, we'll get into that in a second. So what have we talked about? We talked about, it touches on religion, it touches on economics, it touches on race, obviously very significantly, is unavoidable. And then there's really this aspect of culture, and that is frankly a much too big topic for me to completely unpack in one video, even if I had watched this movie 10 times. There's a huge amount of history to unpack with that regard, but I think this is most important to me because it's where I finally settled on my understanding of the vampiric metaphor. And in retrospect, this also hit me even more because the vampire's first interaction in the film is he is white, he's Irish, and then he is shown like beaten and being chased and burning at this like small shack owned by two people who come out, and it's immediately shown that they're clan members, and he's like, oh, I know what to do with this because I know they, like, I can manipulate these people because they're clan members. That is really interesting after all is said and done, because his sort of stated narrative, or stated like pitch even, in the latter part of the film, is about how being part of the group is really important, and that everybody is better for it, and everybody becomes part of the whole. And but the first group he grabbed were two clan members who, by like definition, hate everybody else. Now, like, they get this whole, the whole hive mind thing is a really clever twist on the vampire mythos. That's typically not part of vampires, but obviously you can do whatever you want with mythological things. And it's of particular use here because it's like, oh, okay, so in this mythos, then by sharing all their memories and experiences, they come to an understanding. Oh, these people who were clan members when they were alive are now dead, and they have an understanding, and they just like gloss over that. But it's all about this pitch that he's this very charismatic character who's constantly trying to like sell vampirism to the other characters, even when they understand and are afraid of him. He's like still putting on the sales pitch. And that really got me thinking about this sort of super textual, is the word I'm going to use. I don't even know if that's there's probably a better word for it. I'm not a professional at this. This super textual thing about how evil becomes subsumed into culture, and normalized, and how homogenization of culture ends up putting people together who might, under different circumstances, or when confronted with their individuality, might hate each other. And so to have, by the end of the film, people who would have killed each other on sight, probably, be, perceived as happy-go-lucky together, is very telling. And that's sort of how I end up landing on my final conclusion about vampirism. The vampirism pitch is about taking people's culture. And I've sort of buried the lead here, because so much of the main story is about music. It's about music, and it's about culture generally, music specifically, and Sammy, our actual like sort of point of view main character, who is the one who is actually being pursued by the vampire most viciously. Like, it does waver back and forth, but they make they don't hide at all that the vampire's primary target is Sammy. And that is because from both at the very beginning of the film and in a point in the middle and then at the end, there's a narrative about, or there's a narrator talking about people who have extraordinary, like this gets to, well, they have extraordinary talent, and specifically around music, and how that becomes a sort of, they leave it nebulous, but it's a sort of a spiritual thing that exceeds sort of the normal just listening to music, and becomes a spiritual experience, and even a healing one. They make particular note of healing. And I think that's of particular note because of the context of the Black experience and the former slave experience in America, and how much healing is necessary for a group of people who have experienced such a history of suffering, and one of their only outlets for a very long time like during their enslavement primarily, but after as well, was the music that they could create and they could, heal themselves with to a certain extent, prevent a certain amount of degradation of their experience. The only thing they could hold on to that could not be taken away from them. And so that comes around to this idea of the pitch of vampirism, the pitch of give us your music. I want your music. The vampire basically says it explicitly of, I want you. I want what you have. You have this music. That's the one thing you're extraordinary for in this film. And I want it. And it's not an offer anymore, especially right at the end. It's not an offer. It's a give it to me or I'll kill you for it. And that, to get all the way back around to the beginning of talking about this movie, when I was talking about Ryan Coogler and his negotiations for the rights to this film, that is the almost irony of the willingness of a production company to actually publish this. I guess they're betting that, the subtext will be lost to a certain extent on the majority of people who watch the film. But the irony of sell your soul, sell your art, sell, this is again, this twists into both this twists into race and economics and capitalism in general, and even the way that Smoke and Stack are, operating under this idea of this capitalist ideal of owning a property to generate wealth, even if it is for this idea of generating black wealth. Particular shout out to the For Us By Us, the FUBU shout out. That's a nice touch. I think that's probably lost on a lot of people, but they're trying to have an income stream so that they don't have to be reliant on or fearful of the people around them, in particular the white people around them, and to literally get out of the sharecropping fields. That's a whole other discussion that I can't get into that too. This is why this needs so many watches. They literally pull people out of the fields to come do something better, come do something for us. Let's build something ourselves. But to get back to my point about the vampirism, the cultural problem of, to this very day and probably forever, and it's not a uniquely black experience, not a uniquely art experience. It applies to all sorts of things, but it is particularly pertinent to talking about a black movie made by black people, primarily employing black people, and about art being stolen from black people. It's a perfect image. It loops around in this amazing way. This idea of, in order for you to become part of the whole, to become part of the group, you have to let your art be taken. And I don't know. That's kind of the ultimate conclusion that I don't really have too much more to say directly about. But that then informs everything else that we've seen. It informs the narratives of so many other individuals, who all the people who Smoke and Stack collect to work at the juke joint, whether it's artists or people who assist the other musicians, artists, crafts people of various kinds, people who can cook, people who can dance, people who can sing, whatever. Everybody has something, and there's this sort of climactic set of scenes, and one scene in particular where there is this sense of the external motivators sort of disappear for a little bit. And it's just this moment of pure existing in the art, in a cooperative effort to make an experience to that, like, however you want to term that spiritual, beyond capitalism, beyond race, beyond religion, beyond whatever else, that there's nothing about it, nothing like external about it ultimately matters, at least in that moment. And for that to be the pivotal moment where the vampire alights upon the scene to go, there was something amazing here, give it to me. Give it to me. It's mine now. You will give it to me or you will die. It's just like, even now I'm like kind of shaking talking about it and thinking about it, because it's so well done. And if you don't get the subtext, if you don't have any historical understanding or like literary understanding, and all you see is a movie that goes from guys want to build a juke joint, to juke joint is attacked by vampires, then you probably think that narrative's stupid, but you've completely missed the entire point of the film. It's so well done. Again, like, I've got production issues with it here and there, but it's really got a lot to unpack. I don't know if it's one of my, I don't think it's one of my favorite movies of all time. I don't think it's making that list, but it is really quite extraordinary. And I mean, good on Ryan Coogler for getting the right. He will get his rights back. Yeah, I'm sure he'll be, I mean, no matter what, he'd be thankful to have that. But like, especially for a movie that's kind of as extraordinary as this is, I think it'll be extra worthwhile. I'm so impressed with this film. I'm sure I've forgotten to talk about 10 different other things. As you heard, I was just like sort of rambling through and stumbling upon other things I wanted to talk about. It's really very extraordinary. I could do an hour-long video on any of the individual subtextual discussions that I talked about, whether it's the religious aspect or the economic aspect or the racial aspect or all these other things. All of them are, despite being, well, it is a movie that doesn't spend a lot of time on any one of those individually, but you could still unpack so much from it. It's also a movie that is fairly long. It's like 2 hours and 15 minutes or something like that, I think. And yet, and it does run pretty long, but also feels like, feels like it could absolutely run longer with no problem. I was almost wishing that it had more scenes, because it has the capacity to spend more time, even without like ruining the sort of the subtlety of it, to take a more direct stab at any one of those topics. But it just sort of like sets them down and moves on to the next thing. And it's really quite extraordinary for that. Anyway. Yeah, I really enjoyed this film. Obviously, oh my God, how long is this video? Anyway, I think it's wonderful, and hopefully, if you've gotten to the end of this video, you've seen it. Obviously, if you've got your thoughts, leave them as usual. I will love to see them. Yeah, remember that movies have subtext and literary and historical context that is important to understanding them, because there's a lot of loud people out there who watched this film and clearly didn't. Anyway, thank you all for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'll see you guys next time.